Hey folks, how are you? Interesting one this week. Um, I am, as you all know, I'm going through all the videos that I did 12 years ago. Things have changed a little bit in that time. My teaching's changed a lot, but I definitely have a different opinion on what I'm about to talk this week, which is drift. So, drift is the repositioning of the rod between casting strokes. So, a good example of that would be we make a horizontal back cast, stop, reposition the rod for the start of the forward cast, right? So that would be that movement there, that repositioning movement is drift. There are lots of examples of it. Probably the main one that's used is to widen the available casting arc space for the forward cast after you've made the back cast stop, and then we often drift, and that's the one I talked about in the last video. Particularly, you've got to drift up a little bit with the hand so that the rod tip doesn't dip underneath the fly leg of the loop. Now, I apart from that, it does have some other perceived advantages. I think it might help damping the rod. It may help timing, but I would have to say if it's helping timing, then you probably my argument now is you should be working on your timing. It may help cushion the rod tip, and I will use it for this. If I've got a very heavy fly on, you know where I'm going with this. If I've got a very heavy fly on, um, and it's gonna boing at the end, I might drift back a little bit to try and cushion that out and to grab it more smoothly. Now, I was taught to drift by Mel Krieger a long time ago. I think it was not quite 30 years. I think 29 years ago. I'd just become an instructor myself. Mel was over in the UK promoting Reddington rods. I was working for the UK distributor, the importer, got a company called Guide Fly Fishing, and I met Mel. And we did a show together down Simon Kane's rod company, I think, down on the river Test or Itchen, one of the two anyway. And spent time with Mel, and Mel looked at my casting, and he taught me. It's very influential, especially at that time. Really superb guy. I really liked him, and he showed me to drift. And I really thought it was a bee's knees at that time. I thought it was the dog's bollocks of, stop, drift, and it's wonderful. And I ended up teaching everybody that for a very long time. But I've noticed quite often you'll find casters, competent casters, and you look at them and they're using quite a wide arc. And the reason they're on the back cast, and the reason they're using a wide arc is because they are, instead of stopping and drifting, the two sort of things sort of melt together. And so all that ends up happening is they have a slower, they don't have this rapid acceleration. I hate to say it to a crisp stop, but what they have is a sort of is a slower acceleration, and it sort of slows down, and the loop opens up, and it's because they've incorporated drift into their casting stroke. So I think there are many times now I will not use drift. I don't use drift if I'm throwing at hoops, for example, and that really was a big change. Watched my casting there, and I would much rather just hold that rod position, let that loop straighten, bang, and then make my forward cast. What is the point really in doing that? Is that really going to achieve what advantage do you think we're going to get? Now I know that people are going to disagree with that, and some people think that little movement there is going to make a big difference, but for me it doesn't. And the danger is it becomes all in one. Now, you'll often hear, and I've done it myself, I've often used drift to fix creep. And creep is that very specific error where the caster is so engaged in the forward cast that he's about to make. Hang on, let's get that back there. He's so engaged, so much about to go forward. He's thinking about that, and his rod, he starts to move in that direction, and he's unaware of it. But he's starting to move forward because he's anticipating his forward cast. And there are lots of examples. It's a very human error. Lots of examples of that. You might be remember being back at school. I know for some of you it might be more recent than others. But and you would be there, and you would know the bell's about to go, and you would be just sort of creeping, getting edge of your seat towards the door. You might be aware of it, but often you're not. You might just be, or if somebody puts like a Mars bar or in front of you and says, right, when the buzzer goes, you can grab it, right, and you feel the buzzer's about to go, you kind of start to move in that direction, and then go, and so you've moved and you've been unaware of it. I do it at traffic lights all the time, all right, and it's creep. That's creep. Now, how do you tell as an instructor, right? This is like one of those Trivial Pursuits questions. How do you tell as an instructor whether somebody is creeping or whether they're just starting the stroke too soon and possibly too slowly? In other words, that movement there, right, could be creep, all right, or it could be I am starting the stroke too slow. And it makes a difference as an instructor. You need to know which it is because it's a different fix. So Bill Gamble has a very good, he asked this question, a very good, uh, a very good answer to that. He said, ask the student to pause longer. Now, if your student, right, if your student does this, stop, and then sort of does that same slow forward movement, then it wasn't creep. It was a mistiming and poor power application. But if, on the other hand, your student does this, creeps even more, then it was creep, right? And then you know how to fix it. I know it's difficult. Some people who write definitions don't want to get involved in talking to students because they don't realise actually that's why we need definitions. But anyway, that's a whole that's a whole other topic, one that I'm not going to talk about. So so yeah, they would use drift to fix creep. Now I don't know about that anymore. I did it myself, and I liked it at one time because it said, well, you know, you got this error, you got this issue here, but we can fix that by doing this. But as I say, it can then now lead to another error. So I think better off. My solution to that now is brilliant, by the way, and it's to have an imaginary bell up there in the air behind you, and that's your back target. And I use this for everything, for shots, distance, accuracy, whatever. There is always an imaginary bell up there, and I want you, the caster, to go back, wait, and hold that position until that fly rings the bell. So you're going to go back, think, where to ring the bell, then switch your attention to the forward cast. And I can tell you, if your attention is backwards to ringing the bell, you cannot creep, because creep is brought about by taking the attention there before the start of the stroke. Yes. Very long explanation there. So why don't I use it? You're saying if I used to think it's so good, and why did I use it, and why don't I now? And I think it's a very good question. But I think it's partly seeing casters who are trying to drift, and it's causing a problem. And then if they stop trying to drift, it fixes the problem. So in other words, they're doing this thing to try to make their cast better, but it's making it worse. And it was not really going to make it very much better in the first place. What do we really think this little tiny movement is accomplishing? You know, by stopping and then drifting up, what are we really gaining out of that? And most of the time, it's probably nothing. Where I will use it, of course, is when I do have something to gain. For example, on the 170, the long distance cast, I don't want to start my cast in that position. I want my forward cast back here, so I reposition the rod. That's a very good example of forward drift. I will certainly use it if I'm casting into a very strong headwind, and I've made this high back cast here, and then I know I want to put a lot of power into my forward cast. So I'm going to open up here before my forward cast. Otherwise, the loop's probably going to tail in that case. Um, so yeah, so there are certainly times to use it, but I don't think it should be every single cast. I don't think it's necessary, and if it's not necessary, then why do it? As far as I'm concerned, I might as well just do the things that are necessary. And I have to say, I think for me personally, oh, what's that? Oh, is that a snakehead? For me, I think it was a snakehead, but it was in that slick there. Let's have a look. If it wasn't, we'd still be there. For me personally, looked like a snakehead though. For me personally, I'll get there. I find been a real advantage to really think about holding that position here while the loop is unrolling behind. You know, particularly, I mean, I know when I'm throwing at targets, I'm very conscious of trying to hold that, oops, hold that position, block, while that loop is unrolling there. And I think that's made an improvement to my cast instead of, ooh, where is it, you know? So anyway, they're my thoughts on it. And maybe in 10 years they'll change. So that's the point, isn't it? It's not set in stone. People are going to have different opinions on it. You can try everything, but that's sort of what I think now. Do it if it's necessary. If it's not necessary, don't do it.